So, good evening and welcome to the fourth of our five session seminar series on blockchain. I want to reintroduce to you all Mr. Marcus Griffin, who has been one of the co-conspirators in designing this and whose brainchild this series was. So Marcus, would you like to introduce our guest tonight?
And I know Alex is my guy, but yeah, I keep forgetting. I'm not mic'd up. But I can come closer and say, again, it's a pleasure for me to introduce the next speaker, Greg, because I really thought that I was going to be doing this, championing blockchain in Virginia by myself, and starting with James Madison University. And after meeting Greg, he told me that blockchain was, or decentralization, was introduced to the world basically by James Madison and the Constitution. It didn't just come from one person. We're all together, and it actually came from Virginia. So Greg is the executive director of the Virginia Blockchain Council, and I'll let him say the rest.
Awesome, thanks Marcus, appreciate that. It's great to be here, what a pleasure. Faculty, staff, thank you so much, students. Again, my name is Greg Leffel. I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Blockchain Council. And before I dive into our presentation tonight, really what I'd like to do is just set the stage. So oftentimes when you think blockchain, you think technology, you think deep software and coding. Tonight's not going to be about that specifically, although we will touch on that. But it's going to be about the Virginia ecosystem. And another part of blockchain that doesn't get talked about a lot is the network effect. And the network effect and collaboration is certainly a big part of it. So that's really where we're going to hone in today and talk about Virginia around the block, Virginia style. Here's our agenda. We're going to do the introduction to the Virginia Blockchain Council. I'm going to give you a little bit of background of who we are, where we started, just a tip about me, and then we'll go right into our core mission. I like to use this acronym called ACE. That's for easy memory. So when we're out sharing as a council what we want to talk about from a core initiative, and that's advocacy, community building, and education. Next, we have university initiatives. It's a big part of what we do on a weekly, monthly, yearly basis. We feel like the university initiative is definitely one of our premier priorities and want to continue building that, hence why we're here at JMU and building relationships and collaborating. Then we'll move on to some Virginia success stories. I'm excited to share these because oftentimes when we talk about blockchain, what happens, particularly with our legislators, maybe even our enterprise or corporate clients, maybe their eyes glossed over and it's just like this, they don't think about anything. What we need to do is talk about use cases and how it's impacting the world. So certainly we've got a number of those success stories here in Virginia, and we want to highlight those and continue to amplify that signal, because that's really what one of our most priorities, I guess I would say, from a Virginia perspective, is how do we attract more of that? How do we bring economic development? And it's all based off success. And then lastly, we'll open it up if we have some time for some questions. Here's the timeline, right? So if you can think back 2017, and you can picture this in your mind. I'm sitting in Richmond, Virginia, around a coffee table in a coffee shop. I'm by myself with a little sign that says, Bitcoin Meetup. And it's just me. Literally, the first meeting, it was just me. Fast forward a few weeks later, we get some folks from Meetup that come out, and we start interacting and we start talking. And at that time, in 2017, we all were just looking for a shoulder to maybe not cry on, but actually have a conversation with. Because nobody was talking about blockchain, Bitcoin, maybe even some of the altcoins. It was definitely a speculative environment back then. Boy, has that whole dynamic changed. Fast forward into 2018, going into 2021, obviously we start to go into crypto winter. I start to see the 6 people that we're starting to get community with, they disappear. Because the retail market, they don't really have much interest if the price crashes. And that's exactly what happened in that crypto winter. So it was just the diehards. It was me and my friend George Munden, who's one of our directors at the Virginia Blockchain Council. He and I would show up religiously every month, month after month, consistently talking about blockchain. How do we grow Virginia? And it was more just from a community base. Then fast forward to 2020, what happened? Obviously COVID. That crushed everything, stopped everything, and much like the rest of the world, our meetings stopped, and we eventually picked those back up and gained a lot of momentum in 2021. And then fast forward to 2022, and that's where we actually formalized as a nonprofit 501c6 membership organization. So what happens between just meeting as a community group to becoming a nonprofit and formalizing? Well, what we saw happening was the why, right? It was a fragmented community across the state, the Commonwealth of Virginia. We had a lot of great projects, a lot of great schools doing research, and it was just bits and pieces. And we saw these other states doing wonderful things. We're like, how do we catch up with that? Nobody was taking the lead, nobody was taking the initiative. And in fact, our legislator, they looked at doing some policy work around blockchain initiatives, but it always gets stuck. Nobody ever wanted to take the lead. So what we found out along the way is the great thing about decentralization and blockchain is you don't have to ask for permission. You just go do, right? That's the great thing about not having intermediary kind of being that stop sign. We just decided we were going to do it because we knew that we had to get Virginia out front and we needed to get some representation. We also wanted to help Virginia be competitive and organize the voice to support pragmatic, sensible regulation. Let me make something very clear. We're not pro-regulation. Like, we don't think you should have regulation just for the fact of having regulation. That's not innovative. People don't innovate that way. But what we do need is a sensible, pragmatic approach to it, so we have consumer protections, privacy protection, and all that's super important. Anybody heard of FTX recently? I hope everybody's hand goes up. I can tell you that our legislators down at the Capitol have heard of FTX. And that certainly played a part in our general session with them this year as we talked about a few bills, which we'll go into in just a little bit. Absence of federal regulation, states are taking the lead, and we saw that. So if you take a look at our friends in Texas, amazing blockchain council. If you take a look at Wyoming, amazing state leading on many areas. And then Florida, a host of others, they were all starting to get traction. And what we noticed was Virginia was doing very little. So that's when we knew that we needed to formalize, and that's why we decided to do it as a 501c6. There are no rent seekers at our council, so literally nobody's trying to get rich. This is really to enrich Virginians around this technology and innovation. We are technology agnostic. And it's important for me to point this out because there are a lot of councils across the country are very Bitcoin centric. That's not a bad thing. That just happens to be because A, they have a lot of energy and they can mine Bitcoin in a way that we can't currently today in Virginia. Not that we wouldn't want to focus on Bitcoin because it's a great technology, has a lot of great use cases. It's solving world problems, banking the unbanked, transmissions for money, things that I think are very, very helpful. But we don't want smart contracts to get lost in the conversation. And that's where we start to talk about this blockchain technology, regardless of the type of blockchain that it is. There's basically 4 types of blockchains, right? Public, permissionless, public, the 2 hybrids, basically. So we want to make sure that when we look at smart contracts and decentralization, that we're just matching up technology to what the use case is. And then, just to give you a feel for our community, we've got a few thousand folks across the Commonwealth that participate on our socials. And then we have a large steering committee. We break that up by market. So if you think of Northern Virginia, Central Virginia, and the Tidewater area, and then kind of this Roanoke, Harrisonburg area as well. I want to talk about culture. Culture is important because we run the council from the tent is big enough for everyone. You might notice the tent isn't there. Well, that was on purpose because when my team and I were putting this together, and my wonderful PowerPoint folks that make sure all the fonts are the same and all that craziness that us entrepreneurs don't sometimes think about, well, they had a circus tent as big as you can put on that. I was like, I can't put a circus tent in my presentation. This thing's already a circus with FTX and all the craziness. So I left that blank to remind me that we have work to do in this space, and that's to bring everything down to a level so people feel like there are real actors, mature actors working in this space. Advocacy, so this is one of the first core tenets that we often talk about. I'm just going to go through this advocacy and policy work here in Virginia that we just did last General Assembly. Have any of you been down to the state capitol, done any kind of citizen lobbying? What an experience. It's an education. We actually took some of our university students down with us as we were walking through the halls, knocking on doors, talking about HB House Bill 1784, which was Dow legislation. There are a couple other states that have Dow legislation. In fact, Utah just passed one this session. And Virginia was on track to do that. We had a successful session this year, and what we actually took out of that was a work group, which is going to give us more involvement with our legislatures, stakeholders from around the state that are going to allow us to continue to have the conversation. We didn't get across the finish line, but that's okay. This was our first year. Often legislation doesn't happen in the first year, but the work group's going to pay dividends for us, all of us, as we continue to build community. We did have a general sandbox that died a slow death again. This is like the third time the general sandboxes this go lost. I think next year you'll see that kind of ramp up to more of a fintech sandbox. And if you're not familiar with sandboxes, happy to talk about that after this session, and we can kind of get you up to speed about those. One of the ways that we actually made state news last year was Delegate Head out of Roanoke passed some legislation that allowed our state charter banks to custody virtual assets as legislation. So Texas had passed it previously, but it was regulation. Easily changed, easily done away with. Our legislature actually passed that as legislation, and then this year they did an amendment to that bill which allowed credit unions to also participate, which tends to be a little bit more that demographic that uses virtual assets and really impacts their life. Our legislative agenda for 2024 will continue to work on the Dow, the UCC, which is the Uniform Commercial Code. There's some interesting things that are going on there that really could impact the definition of money in virtual currency. It's definitely concerning. And then we'll continue looking at studies around consumer protection, and that's basically around exchanges, privacy, right to mine, things like that are important to many of us in the community. You can never really talk about advocacy unless you kind of go down this advocacy engagement pyramid. I like to show this, one, because when we have folks that want to go down to the Capitol with this, we kind of go through a little training, and it's important to talk about kind of these different levels. So low engagement being educate yourself. Maybe you follow the Virginia Blockchain Council on LinkedIn, or you're following the Digital Chamber, but you're not doing a whole lot, right? You're just interested. That's okay. That's a great place to start. But if you think about how impactful that is, on a scale of 1 to 10, that's probably a 1 or 2. Then we go to medium engagement. Now we're starting to move the needle a little bit. This is what's important for us, right? So we're calling elected officials. We're using social media to advocate, to educate, and then tagging your elected representatives with an advocacy message. Who's on social media? Just about all of us, right? So if there's whether it's blockchain, whether it's distributed ledger technology, digital assets, or maybe it's just something that's happening here at JMU that you're excited about and you need to talk to a legislator about, that would be a great way to do it, is just tag them in your messaging. And then lastly, the high engagement. This is where we want to be. I purposely made that purple. Leading, organizing a club or activity. Alex, I hope you're reading that one, buddy. That is a great way to lead from an advocacy perspective. And you could attend town halls, meet with elected officials, testify before a legislative committee. How do I tell you that the VBC, the Virginia Blockchain Council, is leading without actually saying it? Well, here's a humble brag. This is our team here at the General Assembly being recognized for our work this last General Assembly in 2023 for our policy and advocacy work. For me, as a professional, that was probably one of the coolest things that's happened to us in a while, or me actually in a while. It was really humbling to have our whole team there, or a part of our team, to be recognized. And I know the good work that we put in definitely paid off. Community building. So we're going through our acronym, ACE, advocacy, community building. How do we do that? We do it through monthly meetups, Richmond, Northern Virginia, Tidewater, the Roanoke area, joint events with Off-Chain DC. So we as a council have a unique opportunity, a unique advantage, because we're so close to Washington, DC. There are a lot of policy thinkers there, really smart policy thinkers, and we get to, feed off a lot of that energy and that excitement and mind share. We participate in a policy breakfast once a month in Georgetown. Definitely very interesting. We do, relationships with Mousebelt University. Francesca, one of your previous guests here, actually made that introduction to us, and they are a great resource for universities to make connections, to bring speakers in. And then we also obviously have the VCU Blockchain Club, the Virginia Tech Blockchain Club, all of that culminating together to be a collaborative environment for Virginia. Collaboration and partnerships, I'm going to just go through these very quickly, but I want you to catch the theme. For us as a council, we talked about the tent. The tent's big enough for everybody. Many hands make for light lifting. So how do we do that? How do we build relationships? How do we condense the relationship curve, the energy curve, and the effectiveness curve? Well, we do that by engaging at different levels throughout the ecosystem. United States Blockchain Coalition, this is a council of councils. So if you think of the Virginia Blockchain Council, we kind of oversee Virginia, but there's one that oversees all the states, and we all meet on a regular basis for a best practices environment. Very interesting because it helps keep all of us up to speed with what the other states are doing. Global Blockchain Business Council, we're an observing member there. That's the world's largest blockchain organization. Digital Chamber of Commerce, they're out of DC. If you ever turn on CNN, you'll probably see Perry Ann, one of the talking heads there. They're peppering her with questions. Generally, it's about FTX anymore, or about Gary Gensler and not passing, the ETF, right? So those tend to be a couple of the really hot topics. Blockchain Association, this is that pretty good policy breakfast that we talk about. That's where all the sharpest minds around policy in DC get together. International Women of Blockchain and the Government Blockchain Association. Education. So we're kind of rounding out our acronym, ACE, education. And voila, here's a great picture of some work that we did with our caucus, our technology caucus through the General Assembly. We had them earlier in the summer, they came out to do a mining tour. They just wanted to see what differences in mining looked like. Then we did a blockchain 101 class for about an hour and explained to them, what is a blockchain? What's a smart contract? Why does it matter? And then we went through a lot of those use cases so they could see and they could connect the dots. They still were as confused, I will tell you this, when they left. But it doesn't happen in one fatal swoop. I will say that you've got to look through this industry with different lenses. There are folks that just think Bitcoin only. There are folks that think smart contract. There are folks that just think speculation. And that's okay, all of it's great. But you just have to understand where people are at and where they're at in their journey. So you can help them make the dots and the connection. Then lastly, we just finished up a training why session was happening. After hours, we actually did another Blockchain 101. We talked a little bit about the DAO legislation in this one. It was super interesting. They had a lot of questions about that. And education, if you were to ask me, what are some of the biggest things that we need to be thinking about? How do we grow adoption A big part of that's not just even from a Main Street adoption, it's also from our delegates and our senators here at a state level, then obviously rolling that up to the federal level. All right, so let's get into the meat of it, right? Why we're here at JMU and talking about blockchain clubs at the university level, at the academia level. Again, this is where research is coming out of, right? Some of the sharpest minds around blockchain are at the university level. So we very early on recognized that A, we wanted to collaborate. B, we wanted to partner. How do we do that? What resources can we provide? Oftentimes we'll do a pizza party for a blockchain club. And then, that's our little sponsorship. But bigger than that, all those collaborative partnerships that I showed you, those folks reach out to us and say, hey, we have a layer 1 protocol that wants to come in, and we want to teach students how to develop on our layer 1. Amazing, right? They actually pay to host an environment, to do a hackathon, to invite the students to come and get introduced to their protocol. So those are resources that I think all of us need to think about how we collaboratively work together. So engage with Virginia universities to help support and build the Virginia blockchain ecosystem. Energize the community base. Think about this. So when you do something, is it more fun when you do it by yourself or when you do it with a group of people, generally? I think it's generally more fun, it's more interactive when you have a group of folks all kind of go in the same direction with the same passion, same excitement. And that's what we want to build here in Virginia. And that's why we have the momentum that we have, is because what? The tent's big enough for everybody. So we want to make sure that we're inclusive, but with the right culture. Help position Virginia and universities to be a leader in the space. Here's an interesting resource. So CoinDesk, if you're not familiar with it, I would look up coindesk.com. They have, every year they come out with a university kind of top whatever in blockchain. And I kept this one from 2021 because I like the quote that they actually reference here. So CoinDesk 2021 study listed criteria for ranking top blockchain universities in the world. And that was out of 240. It's quite a few, right? Does that mean it's all of them? No. Is it still super early, super nascent? Yes. Is there time for other universities to participate? Yes. So I'm just going to read this quote. Overall, the National University of Singapore is in first place as a result of its multiple blockchain research centers. So it didn't just have one, it had multiple. It's frequently hosted blockchain-themed conferences. It's many blockchain clubs. Its company partnerships, and its master's program in digital financial technology. So I highlighted a couple of those because I think there are some things there we can impact today. What are those? That's the blockchain club, right? I think that's super important. It's the partnerships. We can bring all that today. And then as faculty and staff and the dean here starts thinking about curriculum and how they want to approach that, you've already got many, many of those partnerships and relationships built, which is super helpful as you're looking for resources. Help condense networking and relationship curves. So I had mentioned this earlier. One of the reasons we joined that U.S. block coalition, and it was not easy for us to do it at the time. It was a $5,000 membership fee. We're a brand new nonprofit, and we're thinking, oh my goodness, we can't even buy pizza. How are we going to join this for $5,000? Well, here's what we recognized. We knew we needed to align with somebody bigger than ourselves that could give us some credibility, that could also bring relationships and expertise. So we made the jump and we did it, and it paid off 100-fold. So as you continue to grow your relationships, I'm not saying spend money, but get creative on how you build those partnerships and how you be collaborative in this space, because it definitely pays its dividends. Learn valuable networking skills, internships, and event opportunities. So if I was a student today at JMU, all of that would be super interesting to me. How do I gain valuable networking skills? We bring, I'll just give you an example. Every month we host a a mixer that will either do a fireside chat or maybe just a purely networking opportunity. Those students will come and they'll get to meet professionals throughout our organization. They get to learn how to interact. There's a science to networking, and they get to learn some of those soft skills. Internships, I'm going to give you a couple examples of those. We get to share best practices. We actually have a VBC, Virginia Blockchain Council, Policy Fellow position. We run about 4 of those. And that's students get an opportunity to interact with our council on a part-time basis, almost like an internship. But it's all about blockchain. Bring this Hacker Earth relationship, that's the world's largest hackathon company. They actually run the hackathon, if you're familiar with Consensus. For Consensus, that's an amazing relationship. I can see us doing something very similar with the universities. In fact, that organization, we brought Polygon in for a fireside chat just recently, and they hosted the event. We talked about how to do some of that software development. Help with hosting conferences, fireside chats, again, and engagement. Then lastly, I want to talk about these 2 examples. The past president of the VCU Blockchain Club, who's a year or 2 removed now, who lives in Northern Virginia, got a job at the Cato Institute, it's kind of a think tank, as a DeFi fellow. Did that right out of school, basically a $100,000 a year opportunity. How did he get that? Well, it's because he came to the events. It's because he networked, because he was passionate about the space. And they already knew who he was because he was coming to the events with us. So I don't take the credit for that because he's a sharp young man, but certainly very interesting because it's basically you've got to show up, and that's what he did. Secondly, Jolts is another great success story out of Richmond. They hired an intern from one of the universities that are part of the blockchain club there as well. Here we're going to run into the success stories. First one up there is called Blockable. This was one of the first use cases as I was kind of diving in, trying to share with our legislators, what's this blockchain thing? How's it impacting Virginia? It's great to talk about, but what's the real world use case? So there's a gentleman in Northern Virginia named David who had this company called Blockable. History is tokenization of assets, real estate. I'm a real estate entrepreneur from a basically previous life. But tokenization is another big one. So you're going to see the real estate world totally be, at some point, transformed because of this technology. Roundly X, the acorn of investing. Has anybody ever seen the commercials for Acorn? Anybody know what Acorn is? So if you have a credit card, you buy something for $4.50, it will round up to 50 cents, and it will deposit it into your stock account, and we'll buy some stocks or do a savings. Well, these guys figured out how to do it so it would roll into cryptocurrency. They're based out of Richmond, Virginia. They just finished a raise round about a year ago, $2 million. So they're truly a unicorn of unicorns as it relates to some of these types of companies. Super cool. They have about 50,000 customers on their platform. Pretty amazing. Jolts, that's Sats back, consumer rewards. So instead of your Capital One card giving you 1% or whatever it is cash, you can actually get Bitcoin rewards back. Why would you want to do that if it's Bitcoin? Well, there are a lot of people very passionate about Bitcoin. Secondly, it drives engagement. It also increases customer loyalty, believe it or not. So lots of interesting things around that business case. Afloat, another very interesting one. She's out of Richmond, Virginia. She's a CPA. She figured out how to democratize these tax credits around land preservation, put them on a blockchain so people could buy them at a discount. So if I'm a successful farmer, but I have no state income tax, I get this tax credit because I have all this land. But I don't have a tax that I can use it against. So now I can go sell that in the open market. She figured out how to do that on blockchain without an intermediary, and it's a pretty seamless process. So really cool, very interesting, niche-y type blockchain project. Mid-tangible IP rights around NFTs. We talk a lot about NFTs. Rarely do people talk about IP, intellectual property rights. That's something that's being discussed today. It's super important. And that's another one, another unicorn out of Richmond. So Tangible, Jolts, Roundly X, all have received investment or grants from the Virginia Innovation Partnership Corporation. Don't know if you're familiar with that, but that's basically the state-ran accelerator venture arm to really help technology grow in the state. So all three of those, again. The chagrin for me is it's only three. As much as they invest into technology, again, it's only three that they've invested in. And then lastly, I'm going to wrap with this on the success stories, is Loudoun County. Anybody know where Loudoun County is? It's in the news all the time. It's like the data center of the world. They actually have a landfill that produces methane gas, like many, many landfills do. Vespen Energy is actually going in there, they have an RFP, to mitigate methane to run Bitcoin mining. Think about that. We are literally talking about a transformation of how methane is going to be mitigated, number one. We're also talking about how to take energy that used to come from carbon, and now we're doing something that every environmentalist in the world hates, Bitcoin mining. We're doing it in a non-carbon way. In fact, a zero to negative net carbon way. So really interesting things coming on the heels of this Bitcoin mining front. One of our partners, Satoshi Action Fund, they're an advisor to our council. They really help us with many of the questions as it relates around Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining and energy and microgrids and things like that. So all I would say there is keep an eye on that. I think we're looking for creative ways to continue to bring Bitcoin mining to Virginia, but we can't do it from a carbon perspective. And we've got to find creative ways to do it. All right, so this is literally my last slide. And I promise you, this is like picking up the hymnal from church. You look at that, like, oh my goodness, are we really going to sing that whole song? I am literally going to read this, but this is the BBC Impact Statement, Compliments of ChatGPT. Who knows what ChatGPT is? I hope all of us. The Virginia Blockchain Council has had a significant impact in 2022 by advocating for the adoption and integration of blockchain technology across various industries in the state of Virginia. Through their efforts, the council has increased awareness, understanding of the benefits, and potential blockchain technology among businesses, government agencies, and the general public. And again, this is ChatGPT. This isn't Greg saying this. It must be true if ChatGPT is putting this out there. The council has also played a vital role in educating, providing resources to individuals and organizations. I'm skipping down now to the third paragraph. In addition, the Virginia Blockchain Council has fostered a favorable regulatory environment for blockchain technology by working with lawmakers, regulators, to develop policies that support responsible use of technology while safeguarding consumers' rights and privacy. Overall, the Blockchain Council has made significant strides in its mission of advocating, educating, increasing awareness, and building a thriving blockchain community in Virginia, paving the way for continued growth and innovation in this exciting field. Now, when I read that, did that seem like that kind of went through our acronym, ACE? It kind of nailed it. Like, this ChatGPT thing is amazing. Either that or we're amazing. I don't know which, but that's another humble brag. We'll just leave it at that. But that's going to bring me to the conclusion. I want to open it up for some questions if we have any. Thank you. If you want to connect on social, I'm here. Very excited to continue to collaborate and partner with JMU. Thank you for the opportunity to come share our story and what we're trying to do to bring innovation to Virginia. Alex.
All right, so I have to go in a moment so I can ask too many questions, but how do you guys know where to start, like with what you're advising for regulatory issues and so on? Because I feel like it's such a vast world. How do you kind of have a sense of like, let's attack this first and let's probably connect? So
It's a great question. I think oftentimes what happens is the squeaky wheel gets the grease. We're lucky we live in a state that we don't have a lot of people screaming at the top of their lungs that this is bad or that's bad. But what we want to do is be proactive. We don't want to be lethargic and sit on our hands and let policy come to, happen, and then try to activate and be, defensive. We want to be offensive in nature, but, if it doesn't need to be regulated, we don't want to go try to do that. Because there's often unintended consequences that come with it. So great question.
Why'd you go with, pushing it overboard, why'd you start with Dow?
That's a great question. Again, 2 or 3 other states have only had it passed. There was a virtual currency aspect to the front end of that bill that we were trying to address as well. But DAOs are really going to be the cornerstone of Web3. So if you think in terms of Web3 and where it's going, we felt like DAO and infrastructure were super important. The reality is, it was a very simple bill, right? So it was basically called the DAO LLC bill, and all we were trying to do was give DAOs statute in our legislature world and the legal world statute, so our attorneys and judges knew how to interact with them. So if it's an LLC, well, that's been around for 30 plus years, right? So they would know how to do that. So good question there.
I just have a question about the success stories you were mentioning.
Yeah.
Most of those, you said a couple of them were from colleges itself, like VCU. Can you remind me which ones were again?
Oh, that was the internship type opportunities that, so it was the Cato Institute, where one of the students actually went to go work at Cato. It's a very high profile think tank, prestigious, in fact, for a lot of those folks that go there. They also, it was Jolts, that was another internship. Alex, did you have another?
Yeah, where do you see kind of like the field going towards right now, like, of the blockchain space?
I mean, it's a big question.
Right.
We keep a pulse on kind of the regulatory side. I think some interesting things came out from the ETF just recently. I'm curious because Main Street Adoption watches a lot of that, right? But also, how do we get up underneath the hood and really start making significant change with this technology? And that's really where, the smart contract piece of it is important. I think tokenization is going to be absolutely big. If you watch, what do they say? Watch what they do, not what they say. Look at BlackRock, right? They're literally coming out and saying that tokenization of assets is going to take over the world. That should be a screaming red flag or light bulb for everybody to go, man, I really need to start paying attention to this. Because what's happening right now, it's so kind of this gradually then suddenly approach. The world's going to be transformed by the technology. Many, many industry sectors and verticals. It's just, it's been a slow burn.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Do you think it's a steady pace? Or do you think suddenly it's going to take up with that?
Yeah, in a number of different ways. I think speculatively, I think you're going to see pricing kind of do that. You're going to see technology kind of doing that. So it's really going to be from an adoption. How can we make it easier? We were talking about this earlier, Marcus, about Main Street adoption just needs easy and simple. Once we figure that out, I think you'll see a lot more of it. Cool. If there's no other questions, thank you very much for a great evening. It was such a pleasure to spend time here at JMU, and the Virginia Blockchain Council looks for much more collaboration and partnership.